In this video, you will hear from Dr. Joseph Volpicelli, leading naltrexone expert researcher and physician. What are the side effects of the medication naltrexone when someone's going on a 50 milligram tablet for alcohol use disorder? So, what are the side effects and how can people avoid or reduce them?
Yeah. So when we've done studies, we compare side effects to people who take naltrexone versus people who take a placebo pill. And what we find is that the only thing that consistently shows up in the research studies is that people who take naltrexone initially get nausea, rarely vomiting. So that seems to be a clear side effect associated with taking naltrexone. And in general, that goes away usually within a few days, a week, maybe 2 weeks. If that goes away, doesn't come back. Other side effects that people report are things like headaches. People report sometimes they get uh, a weird sensation that they feel that they're taking naltrexone. Now, I haven't really been able to observe differences in people taking naltrexone versus people taking placebo with respect to that. But that's something that I hear a lot in my clinical practice, that people report that they feel a little bit different. And I wonder if their brain is surprised that the way they respond to alcohol is so different. Um, Now, there are other side effects that are reported in the literature that we don't see that often in research studies. So what's reported in the literature includes things like increased anxiety. Some people report decreased pleasure in things, or some people report increase depression, that they don't get as much enjoyment out of things. And so that's something I was really concerned about when we designed the original studies. I was hoping that we could block the reward of alcohol, but not the reward of other pleasurable activities. So I looked very closely to see if I could show any differences between the folks taking the placebo pills and people taking the active medicine, naltrexone. And what I found was, remarkably, naltrexone was not associated with reduced pleasure. Now, there were a couple of perhaps exceptions to that. So, for example, people on naltrexone told me that when they gave up drinking, they would have a period where they'd have increased craving for sweets and carbohydrates, and naltrexone seemed to reduce the pleasure with sweets and carbohydrates. Now, they didn't see that as a side effect, but that was something that they reported. I had another patient who really liked hot, spicy foods, like really hot, hot enough that it brought tears to his eyes. And he said he didn't care for that as much when he took naltrexone. Um, and so certain activities, I think, are pleasurable because they release endogenous opiates in your brain. And typically those activities, I think, include some degree of displeasure or pain. And so people are concerned that it's going to block the runner's high. I found that people still enjoy jogging and exercising. It may block the high associated with sort of ultra marathon running, the people who run so much that they have a closet full of sneakers. And, I had one patient who was an ultra marathon runner, and he sprained his ankle and couldn't run. And he would go through, it looked like physical withdrawal, like he was withdrawing from opiates. So anything that stimulates your endogenous opioids may be blocked by naltrexone. And that could be a side effect, or some people look at it as a beneficial effect. I've had patients who said that on naltrexone they no longer had a desire to binge eat. I've had patients who said that they no longer had a desire to hurt themselves. So people who are cutters often report that they don't enjoy cutting as much when they take naltrexone. So these may actually be beneficial effects, but the general principle is, if you're doing something because you like the pain associated with it, you may not like it as much if you take naltrexone. I have to I have to point out though, that if you're taking opiates for pain relief, then it is really dangerous to add naltrexone to that, because that's likely to bring on a rapid and severe withdrawal reaction. So if you're taking Tylenol number 3, if you're taking hydromorphone, if you're taking anything that helps you reduce your pain, and then you take naltrexone on top of it, that's likely to bring on a withdrawal reaction. If you're using illicit opiates and you take naltrexone without detoxing first, that's likely to bring on a bad withdrawal reaction as well.
Okay. And I did just want to clarify what you were talking about when you said the endogenous opioids and how naltrexone is working with that system. And I've heard you describe this before where it may impact the pleasure someone feels from things that are actually, like, associated with pain. Like you said, the person eating really spicy food, like, it's painful, but they also like the pleasure, or the ultra marathoner, it's painful, but it's pleasure. So, just to understand that a bit more, because that may be a new concept to people where maybe they can't think about it in that way. So, you're saying that if naltrexone has an impact on pleasure, it's probably the pleasure that is somewhat linked to pain. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's it exactly. So that's the natural way to get your endogenous opioids to be activated, is generally pain. Uh, I remember one evening I was late for an appointment and my office was across the street from my house. And so I was running across the field and I tripped and I still saw the patient. My foot hurt a little bit. Then the next morning when I woke up, I had really terrible pain. And I went and got it checked, and it turned out my foot was broken. So the the stress of running, being late, breaking a bone stimulated my own endogenous opioids, I presume. And then as that wore off, that's when I felt the pain. And you hear this all the time in people playing sports or other activities, that in the excitement of the moment, your body helps you to compensate for the pain that you feel by releasing endogenous opioids. And it's not until the next day that you really feel all the pain as the endogenous opiates begin to dissipate. And so it's possible now naltrexone can affect some of that.
Got you. Okay. To kind of build on that question around the side effects, I've heard you say before, I think, that if someone is a really heavy drinker and they start on naltrexone in the midst of drinking really heavily, they may experience more intense side effects. And I remember telling you about a client of mine who was a heavy drinker, really hungover, and started naltrexone on one of her bad hangover days, and her side effects were terrible, but they went away in a couple of weeks. So I just wondered if you wanted to speak to that phenomenon and if that is something that happens for people.
Yeah, so if for you drinking stimulates your endogenous opioids, and that we think that's the mechanism for why people have trouble controlling how much they drink. If in the middle of a drinking episode, your endogenous opioids are already released and they've already stimulated the opioid receptor, if suddenly you block the endorphins at that point, you can bring on a withdrawal reaction. So it'd be similar to someone who has been shooting up heroin for weeks, and then you gave them a dose of naltrexone at that point, you would precipitate withdrawal. So someone who's drinking heavily, if you suddenly introduce naltrexone, you can bring on side effects. Now, what are the side effects? They should look like opiate withdrawal side effects, which includes upset stomach, loose bowels, increased anxiety. So if those are the kinds of side effects that you're experiencing, you could be going through withdrawal from your own endogenous opiates.
Okay. Really good to know that. And if that does happen for somebody and say they do want to stick with naltrexone long term, again, they're going to want to talk with their doctor clearly. But for those individuals, can they assume that those side effects will go away as their body adjusts to the medicine?
Yeah, so the side effects should go away in time. So your body will get used to it, and hopefully have periods where you're not drinking very much. And then when if you take the naltrexone at that point, then the naltrexone will block the opiates, so you won't have the withdrawal reaction. And so this mechanism is a reason why I often recommend that people, when they start naltrexone, try to start it after they haven't had anything to drink for a day or two. It helps you to reduce the incidence, I believe, of side effects, because you're not going to interact the naltrexone with the release of endogenous opiates from the alcohol.
Got you. And I know, just working in this field and having my own personal experience, I had side effects that were fairly mild in the beginning, but they really did go away within a matter of a few days. So I think that's true for a lot of people. I've just observed that. But for individuals who have side effects in the beginning, do you have any advice for how it is that they can mitigate those, reduce them, or even maybe avoid them?
Yes. So in order to reduce side effects, my first recommendation is to take the naltrexone with food, which should slow the absorption of the naltrexone. If that takes care of it, that's great. If that doesn't take care of it, then it's, I will often suggest that they reduce the dose of the naltrexone. Typically, they would only have to reduce it for a few days, then they can go back to the normal dose. So instead of taking a whole pill, just try taking a half a pill. So so dose reduction is a second strategy. The third strategy for people who like naltrexone but continue to have bad side effects, even with reductions in the dose, at that point, I'll often recommend going with the extended release naltrexone. And the reason is you get less high of a peak of naltrexone levels. You get more of a steady state level, usually above that 2 nanograms per ml level. And people who take the extended release naltrexone tend to have fewer of those side effects like the nausea. And I have to say that in general, social supports are really critically important for people in their recovery. I mean, that's one of the things that I think AA gets right. That that when people are have peer support or a coach or someone can help hold them accountable, but give them support when they begin to lose hope, that's very important, critically important in terms of people getting better from this disorder. And so I recommend, from the beginning, we recommended that if people go on naltrexone using the Sinclair method or daily naltrexone, or if they get a monthly injection of extended release naltrexone, that in addition to using the medicine faithfully, it's also important to have psychosocial support to help you get through the process.